An August morning, 1892, a house locked from the inside, to bodies hacked apart with an axe. No witnesses, no escape. And yet, the prime suspect was not a stranger, not a thief, not a man in the shadows. It was her, Lizzie Borden, a church-going woman, a Sunday school teacher, a daughter. Did she truly raise the axe against her own father and stepmother? Or has history condemned an innocent woman, while the real killer walked free? One crime, two deaths, 1,000 unanswered questions. On a sweltering summer morning of August 4th, 1892, the quiet city of Fall River, Massachusetts, was shaken to its core. Inside a respectable New England home, two lifeless bodies lay in pools of blood. 80-year-old Andrew Jackson Borden, a wealthy but feared patriarch, and his 63-year-old wife, Abby. Both had been slaughtered in a manner so vicious, so merciless, that even hardened police officers would never forget the sight. The news spread like wildfire, igniting panic and morbid curiosity throughout the nation. Who could have committed such an atrocity in broad daylight, inside the safety of a family home? The brutality suggested rage, but the lack of forced entry pointed to something even more chilling: murder from within. Almost immediately, suspicion fell upon one woman, Lizzie Borden, Andrew's own daughter. She was painted as the perfect figure for a sensationalist crime story. A stern, unmarried woman in her early 30s, whose strained relationship with her stepmother and distant father made her a character ripe for scandal. Newspapers cast her as a cold, calculating figure, the very embodiment of a woman scorned. Yet, as the case unfolded, the evidence began to blur. Testimonies conflicted, alibis wavered, and what seemed at first to be a clear portrait of guilt became an intricate puzzle. The more investigators pried, the less certain the truth became. Over 130 years later, the Lizzie Borden case continues to haunt American history. Was she truly a cunning killer who escaped justice, or an innocent woman forever cursed by suspicion? That question remains unanswered, buried beneath the echoes of axe blows and the whispers of a community that never found peace. It was a sweltering summer morning in Fall River, Massachusetts, in the year 1892. The heat clung heavily to the streets as the clock struck 9. At the Borden residence, 92 2nd Street, the household maid, Bridget Sullivan, reported for her daily duties. The young Irish servant had no idea that the events of this morning would soon place her in the center of one of America's most infamous murder cases. Standing at the doorway to greet her was Lizzie Borden. To the outside world, she was the dutiful daughter, managing the affairs of the household, while her father, Andrew Jackson Borden, conducted his business elsewhere. Calm, composed, and efficient, at least on the surface, Lizzie carried the demeanor of someone in control. But beneath that quiet exterior, the household tensions had been boiling for years. After tending to some chores on the lower floor, Lizzie excused herself and went upstairs to change into fresh clothes. The oppressive heat made even the simplest task exhausting. But then, just as she was adjusting her attire, a piercing scream shattered the stillness of the home. The sound echoed through the walls, an alarm that something dreadful had occurred. Lizzie rushed down the staircase, her footsteps pounding with urgency. As she reached the front of the house, the sight before her froze her in horror. The door stood wide open, the parlor window was smashed, and there, sprawled upon the floor, was her father. Andrew Jackson Borden's body was mangled beyond recognition, blood pooling around him, his face bearing the brutal marks of an axe. He had been struck again and again, at least 20 savage blows. Though a faint breath still lingered in him, it was immediately clear he was beyond saving. And then came an even darker discovery. Just steps away from Andrew's corpse lay that of his wife, Abby Durfee, Borden, Lizzie's stepmother. She too had been slaughtered with the same unrelenting ferocity, her body bearing the gruesome evidence of repeated strikes from a blade. The once orderly Borden household had transformed into a blood-soaked nightmare. At first, suspicion turned outward. The gruesome murders seemed the work of a crazed intruder who had slipped into the Borden home undetected. But as the day dragged on and investigators examined the scene more closely, that theory began to collapse under its own weight. Both Andrew and Abby were well regarded in Fall River. They had no known enemies, no debts, and no feuds that could have provoked such savagery. Even more telling, there were no signs of forced entry and no evidence of a struggle. Whoever had committed these killings had moved through the house with chilling ease, as though they belonged there. Then came a discovery even more disturbing. The weapon, or at least the type of weapon used, seemed to be a hatchet or axe, one not stolen from outside, but most likely taken from the Borden household itself. The implication was unavoidable. The killer hadn't just walked into the home, they had lived among its walls. With that realization, suspicion turned inward. And who else but Lizzie Borden? Not because investigators had clear evidence tying her to the murders, but because she was the one who had discovered the bodies. She was present, she had access, and in the eyes of the police, she had the perfect opportunity. Suddenly, Lizzie shifted from being the grieving daughter to the prime suspect. The police wasted no time. They combed through the house, but they were not simply searching for clues, they were hunting for guilt. Their eyes scanned every corner, every item, as though the walls themselves might confess. And where better to focus their suspicions than the basement? Dark, damp, and hidden from plain view, it seemed the perfect place for a killer to conceal the truth. What the investigators uncovered in the basement would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case against Lizzie Borden. Hidden among the shadows and dust lay a hatchet, its blade stained with what appeared to be blood. For the police, this was the discovery they had been hoping for. A weapon inside the Borden home, marked with the unmistakable trace of violence. To them, it was not just evidence, it was the smoking gun. In almost any other trial, the finding of a bloodied murder weapon would have sealed the defendant's fate. A jury would not hesitate. The gallows would already be waiting. But Lizzie Borden's defense team was determined to dismantle the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. They argued that the so-called murder weapon was far from conclusive. What if it had been planted? What if the story the police were weaving was more convenient than it was true? To strengthen their case, the defense brought in an expert witness, Edward Webster. Calm and methodical, Webster offered the jury an explanation that cast serious doubt on the prosecution's claim. The bloodstain on the hatchet, he said, might never have come from Lizzie's hand. Instead, he suggested that a single drop of Andrew Borden's blood had splattered onto the hatchet during the attack, and from there, it could have easily been carried into the basement on a shoe or a piece of clothing. His testimony was a lifeline for Lizzie, a wedge driven deep into the heart of the state's argument. But even with Webster's scientific reasoning, suspicion lingered. The prosecution still had a mountain of circumstantial evidence. If Lizzie was truly innocent, then why had the front door been left unlocked? Why would an intruder shatter the parlor window, only to kill 2 people inside and leave without taking a single possession? And why had the murderer chosen Andrew and Abby, specifically ignoring everyone else in the household? These questions clawed at the defense, and no satisfactory answer was ever given. Just when it seemed that the case might tip in Lizzie's favor, the prosecution unveiled its final blow, the testimony of a man named George Robinson. His words, more than any physical evidence, would become the most damning strike against Lizzie Borden. George Robinson's testimony was meant to be the prosecution's killing blow. He claimed, under oath, that he had seen Lizzie Borden returning home from a walk at the very hour the murders were believed to have taken place. His words were devastating. If true, they placed Lizzie at the scene of the crime with no escape. When questioned separately, Lizzie herself admitted to having gone out for a walk that morning, but she was confident in her timeline, insisting that she had returned home around noon. That detail, if accepted, gave her what seemed to be an airtight alibi. She could not possibly have committed the murders. But Robinson's testimony ripped that alibi to pieces. He swore he had seen Lizzie not at noon, but at 10 a.m., a time that coincided almost perfectly with when Andrew and Abby were killed. The courtroom buzzed with tension. For a moment, it looked as though Lizzie's fate had been sealed. And then, just as quickly, the story unraveled. As the trial dragged on, Robinson began to waver. Under the crushing pressure of cross-examination, his certainty dissolved. Finally, he admitted what the defense had suspected all along. He had lied. He had not seen Lizzie at all. His testimony, once the prosecution's final weapon, crumbled into dust before the eyes of the jury. With their star witness exposed as a fraud, the prosecution had nothing left to stand on. The case against Lizzie collapsed, and the jury wasted little time. Against the backdrop of national attention, Lizzie Borden was acquitted of all charges. She walked free not because she was proven innocent, but because the prosecution had utterly failed to prove her guilt. Though Lizzie Borden walked out of the courthouse a free woman, she never truly escaped her verdict in the court of public opinion. To many, her acquittal was not justice served, but justice denied. Whispers followed her everywhere, and her name became synonymous with blood and betrayal. The law had cleared her, but the world had not. Lizzie herself was keenly aware of this shadow. Every time she ventured outside, she was trailed by reporters eager for a scandal, by neighbors who muttered behind her back, and by strangers who jeered to her face. The weight of suspicion clung to her like a curse, crushing any chance at a normal life. In the years that followed, she withdrew from the public eye entirely. Behind the walls of her home, she created a private world for herself, tending carefully to her garden, surrounding herself with flowers that asked no questions, and filling her rooms with antiques that could not judge her. For 3 decades, she lived like a ghost, present in body but absent from society. And then, in 1927, her final chapter came quietly. Lizzie contracted pneumonia, and after weeks of illness, the woman once at the center of America's most sensational murder trial breathed her last. She died not behind bars, but still imprisoned by suspicion, by infamy, and by a legacy that would haunt her name forever. In the years after Lizzie Borden's death, the mystery surrounding the murders only grew darker. Whispers of doubt began to spread. Once more, was she truly guilty, or had history condemned an innocent woman? These doubts found fuel in the words of a journalist named Lester Ceratops, who put forth a shocking claim. Lizzie was not the killer at all. Instead, he suggested, the real culprits were the very victims themselves, Andrew and Abby Borden. According to him, the couple had turned on each other in a violent fit of passion, ending both of their lives. At first, the theory seemed almost absurd, more like a sensational twist for a novel than a serious piece of investigative work. Yet the idea refused to die. Decades later, in 1976, 2 amateur sleuths, Paul and Linda C. Pierce, revived it in their own book, weaving a narrative that was as scandalous as it was provocative. Their version of events rested on one explosive revelation. Andrew Borden, they claimed, had been carrying on an affair with a much younger woman, an actress named Nance O'Neill. He was planning to abandon Abby for her, a betrayal that Abby eventually discovered. Fueled by rage and humiliation, Abby confronted Andrew. What followed, according to the Pierces, was a confrontation that spiraled into tragedy. In a moment of fury, Andrew supposedly swung an axe at his wife, killing her in the heat of passion. Horrified at the act and consumed by guilt, he turned the weapon upon himself. But fate played a cruel trick. The wounds he inflicted were not immediately fatal. According to the Pierces, Andrew survived just long enough to crawl toward the guest room where Lizzie had been sleeping. There, with his final breath, he whispered a lie that he and Abby had been murdered by an intruder. This chilling theory, if true, would explain everything. Why Lizzie believed an intruder had been in the house, why the crime scene seemed so strange, and why the truth has remained elusive for more than a century. As outlandish as the theory sounded, evidence began to emerge that gave it a chilling edge of plausibility. In the late 1970s, researchers gained access to the Borden family's personal belongings, carefully preserved by the Historical Society of Fall River. These items, silent relics of one of America's most infamous murders, were sent to the FBI for forensic testing. What came back was nothing short of shocking. The blood-stained hatchet, long believed to be the murder weapon, was confirmed to have Andrew's blood on it. But that wasn't the end of it. To everyone's surprise, the FBI analysis revealed something even more disturbing. Traces of Abby's blood were found on Lizzie's dress and shoes. This discovery reignited the central mystery. Yes, Lizzie had undeniably come into contact with her stepmother's blood, but did that make her a killer? Or simply an unfortunate witness who stumbled upon the horror too late? Theories multiplied. Perhaps Lizzie had innocently stepped into a pool of blood after finding Abby's body. Or perhaps Andrew, in his final moments, carried traces of Abby's blood with him, inadvertently transferring it onto Lizzie. But then came the darkest possibility, the one that continues to haunt the legend of the case. What if Andrew himself had killed Abby in cold blood, only to turn the blame on his daughter? What if Lizzie was not the executioner, but the scapegoat of a father's unspeakable crime? In 1980, nearly 90 years after the murders, the case of Lizzie Borden was dragged back into the spotlight once more. A district attorney named Paul F. Kelly Jr. did the unthinkable. He formally reopened the investigation, and in a move that stunned historians and the public alike, he filed charges against Andrew Borden himself, accusing the murdered man of both homicides. It was a twist worthy of a crime novel. The victim now stood accused as the killer. Determined to prove his case, Kelly ordered Andrew's body exhumed from its grave. For the first time in nearly a century, Andrew Borden's remains were laid out for a modern autopsy. The results revealed a grim truth. Andrew had indeed died from multiple savage blows to the head. But there was one question that lingered above all others: had he been alive when his body was lowered into the ground? If Andrew had still been breathing at the time of burial, it would mean Lizzie had been telling the truth all along. Kelly placed his hopes on this single point, believing it could finally exonerate Lizzie's name. But fate was merciless. The forensic tests could not determine whether Andrew had still been alive at the moment of burial. The truth, once again, slipped through history's fingers, leaving the Borden case shrouded in the same haunting uncertainty that had always defined it. By 1981, the infamous Lizzie Borden case had slipped back into silence, once more growing cold in the dusty archives of history. But the quiet did not last. Only a few years later, whispers of new evidence stirred the embers of the mystery yet again. Two women, guests at the Maplecroft Hotel in Fall River, one of them, said to be a close friend of Lizzie S., were interviewed by investigators. What they revealed sent a ripple of shock through the case. According to their testimony, Lizzie herself had confessed to murdering her father. At last, it seemed, the truth had surfaced from beneath nearly a century of shadows. But the revelation did not hold. Soon after, one of the women began to recant her statement. She admitted she had lied, insisting that Lizzie had never confessed at all. With their star witness now discredited, police were left with nothing but uncertainty. Confession or fabrication, truth or invention, no one could say for certain. And so, just as quickly as it had resurfaced, the lead collapsed. Investigators let the matter drop, and the Borden case slipped once more into the realm of legend, unanswered and forever haunted by doubt. By 2012, the Lizzie Borden case had already passed its 120th anniversary, yet the fascination with it remained stronger than ever. That year, a team of forensic experts decided to re-examine the mystery, using modern technology tools that investigators of 1892 could never have imagined. What they uncovered challenged some of the most entrenched theories surrounding the case. First, the team revisited the original crime scene photographs, digitally enhancing and reconstructing them to create a near-perfect recreation of what the Borden house looked like on the morning of the murders. From this reconstruction, they studied the blood spatter patterns and made a chilling discovery. The evidence strongly suggested that Andrew Borden was already lying on the floor when he was struck. This single conclusion shattered one of the most sensational theories that Andrew and Abby had killed each other. After all, if Andrew was already on the ground, then Abby could not have delivered the fatal blow. The experts then turned to the position of Andrew's body. Their analysis indicated that the attacker came from behind and struck downward, leading them to believe that Andrew had probably been sitting quietly in his chair when the first blow fell. This detail painted the murder not as a chaotic brawl, but as a cold and calculated ambush. Finally, the team studied Andrew's skull in meticulous detail. What they found was perhaps the most damning revelation of all. His wounds, they concluded, were consistent not with sharp force trauma, the kind inflicted by an axe, but with blunt force trauma. That meant Andrew might not have been killed with a hatchet at all. Instead, the murder weapon could have been something far more ordinary: a heavy candlestick, a vase, or another blunt household object. For Lizzie's reputation, this revelation was devastating. If Andrew's death had not required an axe, then the entire legend of the bloody hatchet was called into question. And with it, so too was Lizzie's long-standing defense. But in the end, none of these theories truly reveal what happened on that sweltering August morning in 1892. The Lizzie Borden case remains, to this very day, an unsolved riddle etched into the dark corners of American history. Did Lizzie herself strike down her father and stepmother in cold blood? Did Andrew turn on Abby in a fit of rage, sealing his own fate in the process? Or was it the work of some unknown intruder who vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only horror and speculation? The truth may never be known. With so little hard evidence, the mystery is destined to linger, tantalizing yet forever out of reach. And yet, perhaps that is why the story endures, because no matter which theory you believe, one fact cannot be denied. The tale of Lizzie Borden remains one of the most chilling, most captivating murder stories in all of American history. The Lizzie Borden case remains a chilling riddle, unsolved, unforgotten, and forever haunting the pages of American history. But the truth may still be out there, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Could that someone be you? If this story sends shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next mystery might be even darker, and you won't want to miss it.